Oh boy, we finally now know a lot more about Microsoft's upcoming Project Scorpio Xbox console, and Microsoft released all the details and specs, and let's just say this thing is actually very impressive for a console. Of course, it's no match for a PC, but we need to give credit where credit is due. So let's go over what we know based on some exclusive access Microsoft gave to another outlet, the Digital Foundry, aka Eurogamer. And we still don't know what this thing looks like. That will be announced at E3, but we do know pretty much everything else about the hardware. It seems like the main objective for Project Scorpio is to do 4K gaming right. Specifically, they want to do games at 4K 60 FPS natively. This is definitely no small task, especially for a console, seeing as in years past, we know that some games have struggled to even do 30 FPS at 1080p. And they don't just want to do this for new games, but also games that have already been on the market, which would be upscaled to the new console for 4K. So whether it's just purely increasing the resolution or adding in better textures as well, this is obviously going to require a lot more power. So how do they plan to even do this? Well, by making the thing a freaking beast, that's how. First of all, probably the most important number is the processing power of their custom-built GPU, which is 6 teraflops. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's put that into perspective. This basically has around the same processing power as an NVIDIA GTX 1070, which has around 5.8 teraflops. You might be thinking, a 1070, that's it? That's not even close to the best NVIDIA card. And you're right, the Xbox Scorpio has around 1/2 of the processing power of NVIDIA's top-end card, the Titan X Pascal, at 12 teraflops. But you need to keep in mind the purpose and, more importantly, the price. A GTX 1070 graphics card will run you around $400 just for one part, whereas Microsoft has to build an entire all-in-one system for probably about the same price. So you have to look at the entire system as a whole, not just the GPU. Let's take a look at some of those other specs, because this is where things get a little bit more impressive. So the processing power of the GPU is 6 teraflops, obviously not the whole story. The GPU also has a whopping 12 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, which is actually a lot. The GTX 1070, for example, has 8, and that's even a good amount. It's not using the faster GDDR5X memory that you see in the top-end graphics cards for desktops, but it doesn't seem like that will be a problem. With so much memory, it also has a large memory bandwidth at 326 gigabytes per second. And that's about the same as the GTX 1080, a great card, so for a console, this ain't too shabby. As for the CPU, that's pretty exciting as well. It's a custom-built one and has 8 cores, just like the PS4 Pro and Xbox One, but with a higher clock speed of 2.3 gigahertz compared to the PS4 Pro, say at 2.1 gigahertz. Again, 2.3 gigahertz on a desktop CPU would be more or less a joke, but for console, heat is a huge concern, so they typically have to lower the clock speeds. Unlike a huge PC case, you don't really have enough room in a console for enormous heat sinks, multiple large fans, spread out components, and things like that to manage heat. Now, you might already be kind of impressed by these specs in a console, but maybe not. But if you want to have your mind blown, get ready. Look at this chip on the Scorpio motherboard. What do you think that is? Is it the CPU? Is it the GPU? The memory controller? The sound card? Well, actually, the answer is yes. That's right. All the main hardware is shoved into that tiny chip. So now perhaps you can appreciate the challenge Microsoft had to go through in getting those specs in such a small form factor. Believe me, I know it's fun to pick on consoles as being inferior to PC gaming. Mostly because, well, it really is. I mean, you typically have much less processing power, no upgradability, no customization or mods, you have to use a controller, but you can't deny the fact that PC gaming typically isn't all that cheap, especially when you want to go high-end. If you only have $400 to spend on a system, I really don't think you'd be able to beat the Scorpio at this point with a PC. But anyway, back to the Scorpio specs. Like I said, cooling is tough in a console, especially when literally all the main heat generating components are packed into one unit, so small. So the Xbox Scorpio uses what is called a vapor chamber heatsink. Without getting technical, this type of heatsink is much more efficient than a standard heat pipes or solid metal, but is usually reserved for high-end hardware because it's more expensive. We haven't really seen this in a console yet. And on top of the heatsink, literally, is also a different type of cooling fan. Instead of a standard axial front-to-back fan that you see, it has a centrifugal fan. You may have seen these on certain graphics cards, and they're also called blower fans. One of the reasons they went with this type of fan is because the main advantage is that they exhaust air directly out of the case instead of just blowing it over the heatsink, which dissipates back into the case itself. So it gets rid of that heat. It can be more efficient in this situation. The final notable bits of hardware are a 1 terabyte hard drive, as one would hope. If it's any less than that, I'd be kind of worried, as well as an integrated power supply. So thankfully, there will be no massive power brick that we've all come to know and hate. Now, this hardware all sounds great, but how does it actually end up performing? 4K 60 FPS is a tall order even for gaming PCs, let alone a console. Well, the short answer is, it works just fine, and for a few reasons. Microsoft and their studios showed off at least one demo where they were running Forza Motorsport, and yes, it was able to handle 4K resolution at 60 FPS consistently, and with less than 70% GPU utilization. So obviously, this means that the hardware is more than capable and still even has more power left to use on better textures or something else that they want to shove in there, not just increasing the resolution. And apparently, they're able to even push the graphics to PC equivalent of ultra quality graphics levels, they said, and still remain under 90% graphics utilization. Pretty nice. There hasn't really been much talk about performance in other games, mostly because I'm assuming they're still working on optimizations, but one interesting thing is that they built the GPU around DirectX 12, which is part of DirectX. And if you're not familiar, it's basically just a framework for running 3D applications like games. Anyway, the main advantage for this with Scorpio is that games built with DirectX 12 can take advantage of the best optimization features of the framework. And the result is that those games could potentially cut the CPU utilization for rendering in half. You can just imagine what that means for frame rate and graphics capabilities that they can put in. Another thing that will improve performance for games, as I mentioned before, is the additional RAM, totaling 12 gigabytes. Compared to the current consoles, the PS4, the PS4 Pro, Xbox One, and even Xbox One S, those all have just 8 gigabytes. But it's not like all that memory is going to be going just to the games, because some of it is allocated differently. You see, of the 12 gigabytes, 4 will be reserved for system processes, and the remaining 8 for games. Previously, Xbox One allocated 3 gigabytes to system and 5 gigabytes to games. So with the Scorpio, games will get an extra 3 gigabytes of RAM than before, and the system gets 1 more gigabyte, so it can better handle the native 4K Xbox dashboard and other system processes. So both situations are going to be getting a lot more RAM relatively. Alright, now with all that, it's pretty obvious that the Xbox Scorpio is going to be amazing as far as game consoles go. But there was one thing I realized that kind of surprises me, and I bet some of you will agree. And that is that the Xbox Scorpio isn't actually a new generation of Xbox. It's actually just another refresh of Xbox One. Wait a minute, didn't we just get the Xbox One S less than a year ago? What's this Project Scorpio business all about then? And it got me thinking, well, do we even really need a new generation of Xbox? Think about it. Why does it have to be that every several years we get a new version of consoles that instantly makes the previous ones obsolete? That certainly doesn't happen with our computers. I mean, sure, we upgrade the operating system, but there's nothing stopping us from running a new operating system on old hardware. Up to a point, of course. What if Microsoft is doing the same thing for Xbox? Instead of launching a major revision every decade practically and forcing developers to accommodate ancient hardware for years, what if they just released improved iterations of the console every few years? You can either buy the new one or not, but the games would still work, as long as you're willing to tolerate less performance if you have a really old console. If that sounds crazy to you, just look at what Microsoft did with Windows 10. They called it the last version of Windows, and that's because instead of releasing major Windows versions every few years that you have to go and buy, install, and go through all sorts of work to get working, they will be upgrading Windows 10 incrementally, continuously. They specifically designed the Windows 10 operating system to be modular, you could say, so that they can make major changes to different parts of the software individually. Therefore, instead of having to release a major upgrade for everything all at once, they can release whatever upgrades they want, whenever they want. And it's even been speculated that eventually Windows 10 will just be renamed to Windows, and that's it. Then what does this all have to do with Xbox? Well, everything. If you didn't already know, Xbox One's operating system, Xbox OS, is Windows 10 at its core. In fact, you can now install certain Windows 10 apps from the Windows Store directly onto an Xbox One, the same app, it still runs. So maybe you're starting to see some parallels here. Now, this obviously is all speculation, but I think it is possible Microsoft will move from a purely generation-based console timeline to something that more resembles pre-built PCs that they release every few years. And maybe they'll start literally doing that, who knows? Imagine, instead of the Xbox platform being centered around one console, they expand it so it's basically just an Xbox-branded gaming PC designed for your living room. And it could be more than just for gaming. Microsoft has been trying to make Xbox a multimedia device for a while now. I'm definitely getting ahead of things right now, but the signs are there, I think. I mean, they named the console the Xbox One. It seemed pretty weird to everyone. I mean, why would they name it the Xbox One? Maybe they wanted to name it a nice round number, just like they did for Windows 10 by skipping Windows 9, so that they could remove the number altogether later on. Maybe. And why would they release so many iterations of the same console with such drastic hardware changes? I can understand the Xbox One S, so they can add 4K HDR support, but another iteration just a year later? Why wouldn't they just make that the next generation? Something seems different. We haven't seen them do anything like this before. But I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. I don't want to speculate any further than that. It's not really worth it. So I think that's just about it. That's enough for one day. Let me know what you guys think though. Maybe I'm crazy, who knows? If you want to keep watching, I'll also put some other videos right here. You can click on those. And don't forget to subscribe. I make new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Should be worth it. Again, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So as usual, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.